Okay, in this video, we're going to be covering 3 scary Reddit stories. Now, you could just fall asleep, watch this while eating, or just something to listen to and just chillax. Well, I mean, it's going to be a little bit hard to chillax because some of these stories are pretty scary. But it's up to you if you want to decide if they're real or not. Also, since this is a new world in Minecraft, I'm just doing the basics right now. I built a house over there, but I had to travel all the way over here to get sheep for a bed, but I'm sure none of you guys really care about that, and you just want to get straight into the stories. But I do want to show you something really quick. So I found this abandoned ruin portal, and I opened up this chest, and I found 2 pieces of armor with mending. I don't know, I just thought that was pretty cool. But anyway, let's get to this video. Alright, this is the first story here, and it's a pretty long one. We got stranded in a snowstorm driving home from Christmas. There was something else hiding in the snow. Darkness swiftly stretched across the snowbound landscape, held only at bay by the spaced-out streetlights flashing by in a low-frequency blink. I sat in the front passenger seat, my eyes glued lazily to the windows as I barely held onto my waking thoughts in a mix of comfortable boredom. In the cup holder sat a long-since cold cup of coffee my dad had brought a few towns over in a foolish attempt at staying alert. We'd already been driving for 12 hours, and we've been driving throughout the night till the early morning hours to reach our destination in one go, managing to avoid spending money on a motel. My dad was stubborn like that, only willing to cash out on services he deemed necessary. Comfort was a luxury. Had it still been warm outside, he'd had us sleeping in the car, knowing fully well that he'd wake up to an aching back. Arguing this point to him would, of course, have been a futile task. I turned in my seat, momentarily dozing off. I'd always loved this feeling of sleeping in a moving car only to wake up at an entirely new destination. It held an odd sense of peace and comfort to let my dad take care of the journey, as if nothing bad could happen whenever he was in control. I listened to the sounds of the engine and the radio faintly playing a segment of the mystery show Unheard. A mild bump in the road then shook me awake, signaling that we made it past the city to once again drive across endless country roads throughout fields and forests. The street lamps that had illuminated the path ahead were gone, leaving us with nothing but our car's high beams to lead the way. The farmers' fields were quickly replaced by dense forests on each side of the road. Glistening snow covered each branch, glittering in the dark night. A small makeshift parking bay appeared a little way up ahead. My dad pulled into it, putting the car in park as he announced that he needed to take a leak, an urge I shared after driving nonstop for the past 7 hours since our last stop. We took a few steps into the woods, forming fresh footprints in thus far untouched snow, and stood side by side, separated by trees as we took care of business. A frisk breeze shot through the trees, unsettling snow in the trees above, which subsequently came pummeling down onto my head, slipping in under my jacket as the snow quickly melted against my skin. My dad let out a chuckle, to which I responded with a freshly formed snowball tossed toward his head. A quick but hectic snowball fight infused, ending with a decisive victory in my favor, though I suspected my dad had let me win. By the time we returned to the car, the skies above had turned overcast with a thick layer of dark clouds. Specks of white appeared before us, signaling that the clouds had already decided to let their first snowflakes fall down to the ground. "Storm's coming," my dad said matter-of-factly, as if he had hidden foresight. "We better get going before it starts." No sooner had we gotten back on the road than the few flakes had turned into heavy but direct snowfall. Though the roads had been cleared a couple of days prior, it wouldn't take long for the asphalt to turn into a slippery mess. Still, we kept pushing, knowing better than to let ourselves get snowed in the middle of nowhere. The wind picked up, shooting white specks of snow toward our windshield, lowering our visibility to near zero. We slowed down, desperately trying to keep the road in sight. Minutes passed, and the path ahead quickly faded away into a white sheet. We were left no choice but to slow down to a crawl. Even then, we'd hit the edge of the road, barely able to swerve back onto the slippery asphalt. "We should stop," I begged. "If we stop here, we ain't gonna be able to get moving again," my dad argued. But it wouldn't matter, because before we could get a chance to argue about the predicament, we came to a gliding halt as the snow ahead had piled up to levels far exceeding what our car could traverse. Fuck, my dad yelled out of frustration before quickly catching himself. Sorry, didn't mean to say that. But the damage had already been done. My dad was a stoic man, never resorting to profanity unless reaching his absolute limit. With a single word, he'd let it slip that he was no longer in control, and the fact terrified me more than anything that could have happened on the road. We should turn around, I suggested, worrying clearly present in my voice. It's no use. The roads aren't going to get any better in the other direction either. We're in too deep. He pulled his cell phone out of the glove compartment and turned it on a hopeless effort at calling for help. But this far away from the nearest city, we were out of luck. There wasn't a single bar of signal to reach civilization. What are we going to do? I asked. It's going to be all right, he said as reassuringly as he could. Your grandparents know we're coming. Once they realize we're not there, they'll know we're stuck on the road. They'll send someone, I'm sure of it. How do you know? I asked, not demanding an explanation, but further reassurance. Trust me, I've known your grandparents a lot longer than you have. We'll be fine as long as we make it through the night. But it's going to get cold, so I'm going to need you to get dressed, all right? His trademark confidence calmed me down a little. After all the stories he told me that he endured, surely he'd know how to keep us safe. I did as my dad had ordered and put on several layers of clothes taken out of my suitcase in the trunk. Though we had little in terms of supplies, there were enough snacks back there to keep us satisfied throughout the night. I dug through the luggage, the presents for my grandparents, and carefully put aside my dad's prized hunting rifle. Don't worry, if we get stuck here for more than a day, I'll go hunt something for us to eat, he joked. But we're going to be out of here by tomorrow. We just have to stay put until someone comes to get us. We turned the car off, still kept the warmth by the residual heat that disappeared minute by minute. Even our presence within the cabin alone kept the heat trapped inside. If only for a short time, I tried to sleep, hoping that the roads would clear up during my slumber, allowing me to wake up in a completely new location, as I had first anticipated. My dad, stubborn as he was, would stay awake, checking his phone in case a signal could get through. Whenever the temperature dropped too low and I so much as shivered, he'd restart the engine, just for long enough to heat up the car, keeping a close look at the fuel gauge. Despite our troubling predicament, I once again felt safe in his presence. Even so, that I managed to fall into a deep sleep, full of bizarre dreams about forest giants and snow trolls, triggered by the sounds of the howling wind and snow pounding against our car. I awoke again to my dad opening the driver's seat door to get outside. He turned to me, shovel in his hand. Stay put. I'm just going to clear the exhaust pipe, he explained. The door had only been open for all of 7 seconds, but it still had enough to drastically drop the temperature inside. He held up a flashlight to assess our situation, its beam prominently displayed by the incessant snowfall, though only able to penetrate it for all of 5 feet. He got to work slowly clearing the exhaust pipe of snow, stopping us from getting suffocated by the carbon monoxide gas. But it wouldn't clear the road, and within a couple of hours, he'd have to clear the way again. He then cleared a narrow path between the layer of snow and the passenger seat door, allowing both of us to quickly get out of the car in case we needed to leave. Once the job had been done, he got back into the car and started the engine to once again heat up the interior. His hands shivered from the cold, and he looked worried, though he'd never admit to such. He again ordered me to try to get some rest while he stayed awake to make sure that we wouldn't get buried in the snow. Again, I fell to slumber, though it had turned to an uneasy one as I had started to notice that even my dad might not be equipped to keep us safe overnight. Then the door opened once more. Only an hour had passed the time, and yet again my dad needed to get out to clear the exhaust pipe, car roof, and doors. It took more time then, both due to exhaustion and due to worsening weather conditions. I kept my eyes and ears peeled, praying silently that someone might already come to our rescue. The roads ahead, now completely invisible under the snow, remained dark. The howling wind had picked up, and apart from the scraping of my dad's shovel and the thumps of the tossed snow, there was nothing else to be heard. But then we heard something. Faint at first, barely cutting through the snow. I thought about opening up my door to get a better listen, but before I could make that decision, my dad jumped back into the car and told me to stay quiet. He looked pale as a sheet. It wasn't just from the cold. There was something else present in his eyes. Utter terror. What was that? Quiet, he whispered aggressively without explaining what he had heard. I froze in place, my eyes fixed on the snow before us, my heart pounding, but I kept focused, trying to hear the sound again. Please help me. A desperate voice called out through the snow, but it differed from the sound I'd heard before. Though I couldn't precisely place it, I knew it hadn't been a voice. It once again prompted my dad to get out of the vehicle. His fear turned to determination to save whoever else might be trapped in the snow with us. Hello? Is there anyone out there? He called as he waved his flashlight back and forth as if to signal any lost souls on the road. Stop it, please, the voice called out, getting even closer. That time it sounded different, like it had come from a different person. It was disoriented by the snow, making it impossible to tell whenever it came from a man or a woman. Where are you? Dad called out again. Help me, the voice repeated, not acknowledging our presence, sounding even stranger than it had before. I can't see you. Just follow the light, he went on, still waving his flashlight around. The voice went on, even closer then. Something was wrong, though I couldn't explain what. Whatever had called for help had awoken a primal instinct within me, one I hadn't felt that far during my 11 years of life, and it was telling me to run. Dad, get back in the car, I pleaded, but he had stepped too far away from the car. He couldn't hear me. I opened the passenger side door and stepped outside, calling for my dad once more in the distance. I could barely see his flashlight waving through the air. Help me, the voice called outside, jarring and unnaturally loud. It didn't even attempt to sound human anymore. Over here, my dad responded. Dad, come back. Then, as if a switch had been flicked, the pleas for help turned to a relentless, ear-shattering scream. It sounded as if it came from above us, from something too tall to even be considered human. I cried out for my dad once more, but he didn't respond. Dad, please, I begged. The beam of his flashlight hung still in the air for a moment, before suddenly starting to spin as if the flashlight had been tossed. Worried that my dad might have been taken by the creature, I prepared to set off and chase after him. But no sooner had I taken one step into the darkness than something pulled me back into the car. Close the door, my dad ordered. I did as commanded and closed and locked the door. What happened? Shh. Using his hands, he gestured for me to stay low. He turned off the headlights and everything inside the car, plunging us into absolute darkness. We laid there for minutes, listening intently for signs of life outside. Once I just started to believe that the coast might be clear, the silence was shattered by another gut-wrenching scream that sent shivers down my spine. I dug myself deeper into the seat, hoping it might somehow keep me safe from whichever horrors were to come. But against all odds, whatever lurked outside didn't seem to know where we were. What is it? I whispered. I don't know, my dad whispered back. Just try to stay quiet. The interior of the car remained completely dark, except for a small digital clock on the dashboard that stated that we just made it past 3 in the morning. Even if we survived until the daybreak, it would take hours for anyone to realize we were gone, much less find us. And attempting to flee on foot would undoubtedly lead us to our deaths, either by the environment or by the monster outside. With no other option, we remained hidden inside the car, counting the minutes as the snow continued to bury us. Unable to use the car's engine to heat up the car, the temperature slowly sank to below zero. Even if we weren't found by the monster, we might not survive the cold. My dad wrapped his arms around me in an attempt to keep me warm, but at that point, I doubted he could feel his arms anymore. It's going to be okay, Maddie. I promise, he whispered. I'll get us out of here. The screaming persisted throughout the next couple of hours, getting closer at first, but always going in the wrong direction, circling us again and again. At that point, our car was covered in a layer of snow deep enough so that the monster could only find us if he stepped directly on top of us. As the morning hours neared, the snow also appeared to have calmed, but the temperature had dropped to depths cold enough that should we fall asleep, we might not wake up again. Despite the fear I felt, my body was about to shut down. No matter how much I tried to fight it, I was just lingering on the brink of consciousness. Hey, Maddie, stay awake, my dad whispered as he shook me. I'm so cold, I shuddered in an exhausted response. Another scream could be heard in the distance, a bit further away this time. This was the only chance we could get. If we didn't act fast, the cold would kill us before the monster did. We're going to have to warm up the car, but I need to clear the exhaust pipe again, okay? With both doors trapped behind piles of snow, my dad opted to crawl to the back of the car, guided only by the lights of the dimmest of courtesy lamps, and opened the trunk from inside. Since it would open upwards, He might be able to get enough leverage to push it against the snow covering the top. He crawled over the suitcase, holding on to the shovel. He then paused for a moment, his gaze lingering on the hunting rifle. Not knowing what we were up against, we had no way of knowing the rifle would be powerful enough to serve as a means of defense. But should it come to a different confrontation, we didn't have any other viable options. He loaded the rifle while laying flat inside the car and put it to the side for easy access as he shoved open the trunk. He then proceeded to dig out as much snow as he could without standing up tall enough to be discovered by the creature. Once the exhaust had been cleared, he grabbed onto the rifle and signaled for me to turn on the engine. The lights had already been turned to their off position, but even though the car wouldn't light up significantly, the engine would still make sound. The engine whirled to life, but rather than climb back inside, my dad remained outside, rifle in hand. In the dark, he couldn't possibly see the thing from a distance, meaning by the time he got in its sight, it would most likely be too late to pull the trigger. Seconds after starting the car, a horrendous, continuous scream cut through the air, getting louder as the monster was rapidly approaching our location. My dad fired his shot into the darkness, guided by nothing more than the sounds of the screaming. He then fired again and again, preparing to get off a fourth shot as something stepped onto the roof of our car, bending it inwards. I dove down to avoid having my skull caved in, losing sight of my dad who had remained outside. He let out a pained yelp as his rifle fell to the ground with a soft thud. As I lifted my head to get a peek at what was going on outside, I could just see something wrapped around my dad's leg, pulling him into the air as he screamed mixed with those of a tall creature. I wanted to call out for him, but I knew better than to give away my position just to be taken like my dad. So I crawled through the damaged car in silence, attempting to reach for the rifle that had fallen into the snow. Though I hadn't ever been allowed to hold a firearm, I had been thoroughly lectured on its safety. I made it throughout the trunk, crawling outside into the snow. The snow had subsided and the skies had cleared, revealing a near full moon that cast a dim white light upon the snowbound landscape. Above the car stood the creature, holding my dad's leg in one twisted arm. It stood at least 10 feet tall, its silhouette contrasting starkly against the night sky. Antler-looking emerged from its shoulders, while its head appeared almost fused to its torso, its face not seen in the darkness. It stuffed my dad's leg into its mouth, closing down on it with teeth sharp enough to tear straight through the flesh. Having no time left to lose, I picked the rifle up, pointed it in the creature's direction, and pulled the trigger. A loud bang continued throughout the night, leaving me deaf for a moment. I found myself on the ground, having been shoved down by the rifle's recoil. The shot had hit the creature, distracting it enough to let my dad fall into a pile of snow, but it didn't appear wounded. All I had achieved was it to redirect its attention to me, and I had nowhere left to run. The creature gazed down at me, bending down close enough so that I could see its face reflected in the moonshine. It had large round eyes, pitch black and empty, and a large gash for a mouth filled with rough, pointed teeth that extended for rows upon rows inwards. For a moment, it just observed me, almost as if impressed with the fight I had put up. "Maddie," I heard my dad yell, but it wasn't enough to distract the creature from its next victim. It began reaching out its hand, and I couldn't even yell as my own life neared its sudden end. "Leave him alone," my dad yelled as he rolled down from the pile of snow. He grabbed onto the rifle, quickly cycled it before firing off another shot, this time hitting the creature directly in its eye. The impact was enough to send it into a fit of rage, but the pain also distracted it long enough to allow my dad to push me under the car, before he himself climbed under it. The creature, having lost sight of us, let out one final, gut-wrenching scream before leaving the car to search for us down the road, blinded in one eye, oblivious to our hiding spot directly under the car. Only once we were sure it had left the area did we climb back into the still running car, carefully closing the trunk. The moon was about to set, giving away to a next day, but we weren't safe yet. A large chunk of my dad's leg had been bitten off, and he was quickly losing blood. He tried to use his own belt as a tourniquet, and though it slowed the bleeding, he needed immediate medical attention. "Someone will come," he promised. "How do you know?" I asked. "You just got to trust me on this one. You have to hang in there. You'll be fine." "What about you?" "I'm not going anywhere, I promise." But hours later, no one had come, and my dad had fallen into a deep sleep from which I couldn't wake him. I lay my head on his chest and cried, knowing he'd soon be dead, and there was nothing I could do to save him. Then the engine came to a pathetic stall, leaving me alone in absolute silence. The first rays of sunshine dared peek over the horizon, dancing among the snow-covered trees. If not for the horrors I endured, it would have been a beautiful morning. Finally, I exited the car to see if the road would lead me anywhere, but it all looked identical under the thick layers of snow. I wouldn't know which way to take even if I had a map to guide the way. In the distance, I could see something shifting among the trees, and a faint, whirling sound approaching our car. 5 snowmobiles emerged from the tree line, having spotted me from afar. I jumped up and down and waved to them for help. They were wearing bright orange outfits with crosses on their back. They immediately halted around our car and tended to my unconscious dad, while one of them wrapped me in an orange heat shield. He tried to ask what had happened, but I was too deep in shock to respond. All I could do was look at them in shock while they loaded my dying father onto a stretcher, preparing to take him to a hospital. Using what little I had left on my cognitive function, I tried to warn them about the monster we fought off, but it all emerged as an incomprehensible word salad. They could respond by reassuring me that we were safe, but after all we'd seen, I wasn't so sure I could believe them. The next thing I recall was waking up in a hospital bed, unharmed if not for the mild hypothermia I'd suffered. My grandmother sat by my bedside, sleeping in a chair. My dad was nowhere in sight. I cried for a moment, but she promised that everything would be fine. She explained that my dad had been taken in for surgery, and that they would have to remove his leg, but that he'd be otherwise fine. She asked me what had happened, but I wasn't sure. I wanted to tell her before my dad was there to support my story, worried she would think I'd lost my mind. She respected my wishes, reassuring me that I didn't have to talk about anything until I felt ready. My only task was to focus on my recovery. A couple of days later, 2 men visited me in the hospital, casually dressed, but with strict expressions on their faces. They introduced themselves, but I couldn't take note of their names. They asked me what I'd seen in the snowstorm, but unlike my grandmother, they weren't receptive to my refusal to talk without my dad present. I told them about the creature, and though they weren't happy about it, they didn't try to refute my experience. They only mentioned something about a threshold event, but didn't elaborate any further. They explained to me that my dad needed to be taken in for further treatment at their own facility to rule out complications of their attack. I asked to be taken with them, but they refused, citing infection risk as the reason for denial. They tried to reassure me that they'd do everything they could to take care of my dad, but they didn't come across it in a genuine manner. I was discharged from the hospital after 5 days of treatment, and learned from my grandmother that 3 other cars were stuck on the same road that night, only a few miles apart. The passengers of those cars were never found. They were reported missing the following morning, but I already know that they won't be found. It would take another 2 months before I got to see my dad again. 2 months, which I spent at my grandparents' place. When they finally let him go, and though he was physically healthy apart from missing his leg, the mental toll had changed him. He had spent the rest of the winter weeks staring out of the window into the snow, only calming down once spring had taken over and melted away the snow. Even then, he refused to talk about what we'd been through. Though he would acknowledge and confirm the trauma we'd been through was real, he never dared go into detail. My dad died last year, 19 years after this event, from unrelated illness. He never truly got over the trauma of that night in December of 2005, nor have I, but surviving the memories without the only person that was there to go through them with me has shattered the little progress I've made. The uncertainty of it all and the lack of answers have left me unable to forget. I'll always remember my dad for the man he was, regardless of the event that night. A man that would have done anything to keep me safe, full of life, determined, and loyal. That's the end of that story. Nah, that was a pretty good one, but I'm gonna be honest, I don't think that's real. And if that is real, that is something, man. Okay, this is gonna be story 2. I cross-referenced the missing persons map with my local caves. I wish I hadn't. You'd probably seen this map too. It pops up on Reddit every few months, usually on creepy or map porn. It shows 2 images. One is a map of missing persons, and the other is a map of America's subterranean cave systems. The overlap is practically identical. The caverns match the disappearance almost 1-to-1. Most people look at it, go, huh, creepy, and scroll past. I used to, too. But this time, I zoomed in. I live in a stretch of Kentucky, deep in the foothills. I noticed a dense cluster of red dots right in my country, sitting directly on top of a minor cavern system called the Backwoods Sinkholes. It wasn't a tourist trap like Mammoth Cave. It was a jagged scar in the woods that even the locals didn't bother with. I showed it to my girlfriend, Jess. Calling Jess outdoorsy would be putting it lightly. She's the kind of girl who owns 3 different types of hiking boots and thinks a weekend without dirt under her fingernails is a wasted one. I'm the opposite. I stay up until 3 a.m. reading about unsolved murders and just being a vampire. It's a match, see? I pointed at the screen. Nobody goes missing here because they get lost. They fall in, or something pulls them in. Jess rolled her eyes, but grinned. You want to go ghost hunting? I want to go debunking, I corrected. We hike out, set up camp near the sinkholes, cook some actual food, and drink some bourbon, and see if the Mothman shows up. It wasn't supposed to be funny. A mix of her love for nature and my morbid curiosity. We packed the Jeep on Friday. Tents, sleeping bags, and a heavy cooler filled with marinated short ribs and ice for the whiskey. The hike to the Blackwood sinkholes was only about from the nearest logging road. But the terrain was brutal. The trees grew thick and wrong here. The roots twisted over the limestone ground like fingers. By the time we found the main entrance, I was ready to drop dead. The cave mouth was a horizontal slash in a limestone cliff face, about 10 feet high and 30 feet wide. It looked like a mouth held open in a silent scream. A steady, cold breeze followed out of it, smelling of wet rock and old copper. Creepy, Jess noted, dropping her pack. I could dig it. I love this girl. We set up camp about 50 yards from the entrance, just far enough to avoid the draft, but close enough to stare into the darkness. I got the fire going, while Jess prepared the grill gate over the coals. We were doing this right. Slow-cooked, sticky ribs slathered in a spicy bourbon sauce. Heat from gentle coals licked at the meat, and the smell was intoxicating. Anyone who loves barbecue knows what I'm talking about. Smoke, fat, sugar, and char. Jess was walking back from the tent with drinks when a downdraft caught the smoke, pulling the fume low across the ground and sucking it into the mouth of the cave. Feeding the beast, Jess joked while handing me a solo cup half filled with Knob Creek. Hope they like ribs, I laughed. We ate as the sunset turned to twilight, and then drank as twilight gave way to pitch black. Jess put her hand on my shoulder. I thought I was going to get lucky, but then she told me to shush. That's when I heard the silence. All day there was a symphony of crickets, cicadas, and rustling leaves, but now the silence was thick, heavy, and oppressive. It felt like the forest was holding its breath. And then the cave moaned. At first, you could probably mistake it for the wind. It was too low and too long of a groan to come from any human lungs. Then it got louder and closer. Jess whispered low, "Did you hear that?" And it took everything I had to not tremble. She shone her flashlight toward the cliff. The beam cut through the darkness, but the cave mouth swallowed the light. Probably a coyote or a bear. We should pack the food up tight, I murmured back, more to myself than her. That didn't sound like a bear. That sounded congested. We started scrambling to clean up. I was tossing the bones into a trash bag when the sound changed. It wasn't a moaning now. It was a reaching noise, a wet, hacking cough that echoed from deep within the rock. Then a voice, or something trying to be a voice. Come. Maybe it wasn't English. Maybe my mind was trying to find a meaning when there wasn't any. Jess dropped the cooler lid. What the hell was that? I grabbed the hatchet I used for the firewood. We're leaving now. The tent. Leave it. The smell hit us before we saw them. It wasn't the lingering sweet smoke of our barbecue anymore. It was a wave of rot, rancid meat, and something muskier, like a wet dog that had been dead for days. From the darkness of the cave, they came. They weren't humans. They looked like humans who had been stretched on a rack, pale skin pulled tight over bones that had way too many joints. Their eyes were milky white, unless and blind. Long rot-stained teeth, chipped and broken, jagged, stuck out from their low-hanging jaws that were way too wide and loose. There were 3 of them. 2 of them crawled on the ground, and the third limped in a jerky motion, all insect-like. They went straight for the grill. One of them grabbed the scorching hot grate with a bare-clawed hand. It didn't even flinch as its skin sizzled. It brought the metal to its face and groaned, licking the grease with a tongue that was too long and too black. "Don't move," I whispered, terrified that the sound of my heartbeat would give us away. The creatures let out a clittering sound, dropping the grate. It turned its head. It wasn't looking at us. It was blind, I could tell, but it was looking for us. It tilted its head, sniffing the air like a hungry dog. It was smelling for us. And then it arched its back and wailed. It was a nails-on-chalkboard, teeth-grinding, bone-chilling screech that shot down my ears and prickled at something in my gut. It opened its too wide mouth, and I saw my death. I threw the bag of trash at them. It was instinct. The bag hit the screecher in the chest, spilling rib bones and paper towels. The distraction worked for a second. The three of them fell upon the ribs and garbage in a frenzy. I could hear them snapping the bones with audible crunches. "Run!" I screamed. We sprinted through the darkness. We tripped over roots, slammed into saplings, and tore our clothes on branches. Behind us, the snapping of bones stopped, replaced by a high-pitched, gut-wrenching screech. And that sounded like something beyond a coyote and a sobbing child. I could hear them crashing through the brush behind us. They were fast. So incredibly fast. We burst onto the logging road just as I threw the keys to Jess. We dove into the Jeep. She slammed the locks just as something heavy slammed into the rear window. The glass spiderwebbed but held. I looked back as Jess peeled out, dirt and gravel spraying everywhere. In the red glow of the taillights, I saw them. The tree line was filled with them. Some were standing in the middle of the road, dead still, just watching. There were so many. We drove in silence until we hit the highway. We didn't report it. Who would believe us? We told our friends we got spooked by a cougar. But I went back to the map today. I looked at the cluster of red dots in my country, and I looked at the timeline. Most of the disappearances happened in the summer. Memorial Day, 4th of July, Labor Day. Holidays. Holidays where people go outside, where people light fires, where people cook meat. I thought the maps overlap because people fall into holes. It's not. I thought the sinkholes were just holes in the ground. They aren't. They're ventilation shafts. And when we play and laugh and cook barbecue, we're ringing the dinner bell. Alright, that's the end of that story, and just like the first one, I personally do not believe that's real, but still, amazing writing capability. On to the third and last story. This one's titled Street Lamps. I'll never forget that night. I was walking my dog through the edge of the neighborhood, where suburban streets met the thick, hostile woods. The darkness at that hour engulfed anything that wasn't under the warm, orange glow of the street lamps, which was oddly comforting. There used to be a refuge I found under those lonely lamps and the surrounding blackness. That barrier insulated me from the rows of houses beyond, leaving my dog and I utterly alone. As we walked silently down the lit path, I heard a faint footstep fall behind me. Out of sync with either mine or my dog's, a chill ran down my back and I froze. Turning around, nothing was illuminated but the pavement. Glancing past the pavement and toward the tree line, my eyes could only grasp the few branches visible in the light. I began to pick up my pace. The shadows in the trees began to shift and grow as I left them in my vision. It wasn't 10 paces before I heard it again. Several hurried steps, like heavy boots rebouncing off concrete, echoed from behind. My dog began barking madly, and I quickly swerved around to find a shaking branch just past the sidewalk, leading into the woods. I stared painfully at it, my sight piercing the darkness, trying to see something, anything. But nothing appeared as my eyes adjusted. Spiny trees formed a wall which my vision couldn't penetrate. I turned back to the road and began trudging alone at a quicker pace. I was moving quick enough that my own steps and heartbeat drowned out the sound of anything else. I was only a few streets from my home, and it couldn't come sooner. I looked towards the road and watched my long shadow cast along the orange backdrop of the street lamp above my head. I stopped in my tracks. Something wasn't right. A light above my head shouldn't cast a long shadow. My head spun towards the woods again, searching for a light. Nothing was there, but the metal pole next to me was vibrating, as if struck. I looked up and was blinded by the direct warm glow of the light beaming down. A heavy metallic clang grounded my eyes to my dog in front of me. He was barking madly towards the end of the street ahead, where the sound echoed far off from us. I tried to see, but the ghost of the lamp bulb lingered in my gaze, obstructing the source of the noise. It sounded like a piece of metal bending and snapping repeatedly, sending the hairs of my neck upright. I clenched my jaw and stumbled backwards a few steps, jerking the dog's leash with me. The clang stopped soon before the ghost faded from my eyes. I looked down the road and saw nothing strange. My dog began whimpering and I looked all around me as the wind chilled my skin and gazed my scalp. I fled away from the street lamps and into the center of the road, distrusting the trees and poles that lingered near. Upon my second scan of the environment, I spotted something. Behind me, along the sidewalk, there was a single stretch of darkness where no light shined. The street lamp was gone. I immediately recognized it as the spot where my shadow had fallen. Gone? But how? My eyes stung as I stared, looking for an answer. I saw that the distance between the two lights adjacent to the missing pole was the same as the distance between every light on the other side of the street. Glancing along both sides of the road, I could now see that there was twice as many street lamps on the side I had been walking on, both in front of and behind me, all except for the missing light. I tugged on the leash and I began to sprint down the road as fast as the dog could follow. Was I overreacting? Was the street designed like that on purpose? Or is something else happening? I didn't want to wait and find out. I was going home. To get there, I'd have to cross where the sound had come from, and I was swiftly approaching. With wind blowing and the dog panting in my ears, something prevented my gaze from turning upwards, away from my feet, to see what was ahead. Was something there? The shadow cast from my feet began to grow in front of me. My teeth ached from the pressure of my jaw. I followed the shadow as it grew further down the road ahead. Looking up, I could see it. The missing street lamp. It was fixated between two other posts on the forest side of the road just ahead. More pressing, however, was my shadow. It continued to grow, split, and mutate into many spindling depositions of my own silhouette as the road reflected brighter and brighter orange light. The same bending, snapping noise filled my ears, echoing from behind, and I locked into a dead sprint, letting go of the leash. The dog fell behind me, and I heard him whimper and cry. I couldn't turn around. As I approached the end of the street, a loud clang rang out like a scream from the out-of-place street lamp. It was bending down to my height, its light shining directly towards me, right before my eyes. The air whipped at my wide eyes. The lights following behind me were keeping pace, and I couldn't stop. I ran in a wide arc around the bent street lamp, its gaze following me in my vision the whole time as I turned into the next street. The lights and sounds behind me dimmed as I raced into the empty street, devoid of any lights whatsoever. I passed the next turn, sending me onto the street with my house. I didn't turn around once. I struggled to pull out the right key and twist the door open with my shaking hands. I didn't sleep that night. In the days preceding that night, I passed around missing posters for my dog. I never found him. I stopped walking at night. I avoid passing that street when I can, and I don't tell people this story. The few times I've been back there seemingly prove that nothing odd occurred that night. All the street lamps are in proper, identical order across both sides of the street. I still don't know what happened that night. So that's the end of the third and final story. And losing your dog, I ain't gonna lie, that's crazy, man. That's crazy. Come on. You lost your dog. You heard your dog whimper and cry, and you kept running. Man. But anyway, aside from losing your dog, that's going to be the end of this video. And if you could like and subscribe, give me more motivation to post more of these crappy little videos. Well, I hope they're not crappy to you guys at least, but anyway, I hope you enjoyed. Have a good night.